pass it over to Kevin Dice with his presentation, Grow a Bonsai, Not a Shrub.
This is like super faded, but you want to check if I'm in the frame?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So hi, my name's Kevin Dice. This is a talk called Grow a Bonsai, Not a Shrub. I'm KD Dice on the internet. My last name's really hard to spell, but it's in alphabetical order, so that may help you. Fun fact. And I work at a company called Culture HQ. You haven't heard of us because we're 3 people, but we're feisty. And if you want to talk about measuring and improving culture in your workplace, we should talk after this. So I'm going to start with a story. This is a hypothetical story that it happened, but I'm trying to pretend like it didn't. So my wife and I flew over to Italy for vacation, and we were going to rent a car. Unfortunately, she's a much better driver than I am, and she was willing to drive on the Amalfi Coast, which is a little bit nuts. But we get there, and we are dumb Americans and young, and they don't have any automatic transmissions. And I can't drive a manual, and my wife can't drive a manual. And so we're sitting there, and what do, right? So we sit there, and we get yelled at by a guy in Italian, and we decide that we have to wait for the next car to come in. And eventually it got in, and we had plenty of espresso to hold us over. But the question really became, whose fault is this? Because we're sitting there and we're blaming people. And the first one that I came up was the people that built automatic cars, right? Because if it were just manual cars on the road, then I would know how to drive a manual car, and everything would have been fine. Or the people that still rent out manual cars, like, what are you doing? I should be able to just rent an automatic car, everything would also be fine. Or it's my fault for never learning how to drive a manual for various reasons listed in here. My dad calls me up, tells me I need to be able to do that. Anyway, none of this is really the reason. But if you look on the internet and you translate this metaphor over to programming, when an engineer has a bug, when there's a problem in the code, Hacker News will tell you that there are, it's your fault, or it's the language's fault, or it's the new framework's fault. I like this guy, he says that technology is not changing quickly, so he's up to speed. This person says advice on Ruby or Python is stupid. This person that says React and Rails are mutually exclusive, which is just excellent. And today I accepted that Rails is yesterday's software. So there are just tons of orange things throwing up on my computer. It's very presidential. But thank you for someone for laughing. No, the real answer to this is that it's a societal failure to standardize. Right? I don't really care if it's automatic transmissions. I don't care if it's manual. The real problem is that there's a difference. There should only be one. And I can't fix that on a societal level, but on a code level, I can fix that. I can go and make it so there's only one way to do things. So the real story here is that code is written by the first engineer that has to understand the problem. The first engineer who invented an automatic car said, okay, I understand this fully. And everyone else looked at them like they were insane because they all knew how to drive automatics, or manual. Code is read by every engineer that has to understand the problem. This means that every single person that has to see this part of the code has to go in and read it. They have to understand it. They have to be able to comprehend what is happening. So the worst case scenario of a wholly unreadable code base, and this is a bit of a hot take, but the first one I'm going to say is microservices. Microservices are a bad outcome if they are not intentional. If you're going to do microservices, it needs to be because your business should have microservices. It shouldn't be, oh, we're going to do microservices to fix our bad code base. That's not a solution. That's like being in a bad marriage and being like, oh, let's have a baby. That'll fix everything. That's not going to fix things. It's going to add problems. halt and refactor is also very common, where engineers say, oh, no new features, only refactor. It'll be great, I promise. Or the absolute worst case of a complete rewrite. Now, all of these things are valid approaches. All of these things are things that can happen and can be good and beneficial to your business. But all of them should be intentional. You should be choosing to implement these things. You should not be forced into this situation. And now we have a sloth. This just makes me happy. So the real solutions to this problem that I'm going to propose to you, the first one is static analysis. The second one are reflection tests that I'm going to explain what that means. And the third one is strategic investment of your time and energy into the right places in your code base. So really what we're doing with these three things, we're determining the standards of the code, we're going to enforce standards on new code, and then finally we'll enforce standards on old code. So let's get into some examples. RuboCop. RuboCop is the devil that we need. It looks like this on the internet. And RuboCop has a ton of different rules. I don't really care about most of these. In fact, most of these I would probably just turn off or just use something that automatically formats for you. Most of these don't matter. The one that gets turned off the most, though, is this one. For those of you that are familiar with metrics, the metrics section of RuboCop, it's all of these 10 cops. And these cops tend to get completely turned off because people will say that they're way too hard to implement immediately. I'm also going to introduce Reek. Reek is another static analysis tool, not quite as popular as RuboCop, but I think way more valuable. And Reek is supposed to find code smells, hence the name. Reek has all of these rules. I care about these. These are relatively similar to the ones in RuboCop that are under the metrics section, and together they form three categories. So we have rules for variance. I'm calling this variance. This is variance in code size. If you have a user class that is 1,000 lines long, and then you have an event class that is 50, that's bad. I don't need to convince you that that's bad. You know that's bad because you can't read the user class in one sitting. You have to go and get a break and get some coffee. That's not good. You should be able to read every class in one sitting. We also have rules for complexity. ABC size is assignment branch condition. Block nesting is how far in you're doing it. If you ever have if statements that make something look like a pyramid, you are not an Egyptian. That is bad. Don't do that. Cyclomatic complexity, perceived complexity. To be honest, I have no idea what all these things mean. It just means your code is too complex in that one specific problem area. And the last are my absolute favorite. These all come from Reek. Feature envy, in particular, is really fun. This is where one piece of code is reaching too far into another piece of code and you're breaking encapsulation. So if you have a event class and you have a user class, and the event class has a function on it that says can user admin, and it accepts a user. And then it checks, is the user an admin? And is the user a host? And is the user a co-host? And all this information. That information should live on the user class, but instead you've pulled it out into the event class. And now you have feature envy. Right? The event class is envious of all the user's information and all the metadata. So we're going to go into a couple examples. For variance, so let's say you have an event class, and you got real happy with scopes. And you have all these methods that are all necessary. Now, one real big clue for variance that you need to refactor is if you have the same prefix on a whole bunch of methods. These need to be pulled out. So what we're going to do here is pretty simple. We're going to pull it out into a separate object, separate little query object, events and locations. It's a pretty simple refactor. But what we've done is we've moved this out into a place where we can test this separately, where we can look at it separately and put it into different contexts and really think about all these different things. And all of a sudden, we've fixed up a whole bunch of violations, right? Our event class is not going to be more than 1,000 lines long. We just removed like 100 lines from it. And we made a separate object. We made this queries, events, and locations object. And we get to call results on that, and that's the end. And now that it's even a nice little class method, we can make it into a scope, and we're good to go. And this is all we have. We have a nice little class method that yields this object, and this object is really easy to reason about. Complexity. So how many of you have ever had a case statement where you switched over classes like this? Okay, so everyone here is not raising their hands. Cool. So this is really common. I see this a lot. This is bad. I'm going to tell you why this is bad. This is bad in multiple ways. The first way that it's bad is it's just overpopulating the user class. There's just way too much information here, right? So we're going to do pretty much the exact same thing we did before. We're going to, oh yeah, don't have my notes here, but this is not a solution. That's not a solution to fix that. Rubocop disable all. Yeah, don't do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull out another object, admin check.new. We have this object we call a delegated method, and we're good to go. And then we have this. And this is good. This is good. This is right with the world. The rules for Rubocop are satisfied. The rules for Reek aren't satisfied yet, but we'll get to that in a minute. Finally, design. Design was the third category of static analysis violations that we're going to look at. Going back to this example, we have pretty bad feature envy here. We're reaching into multiple different classes to figure out what they're doing, to access what should be private data on each of them. Additionally, we have simulated polymorphism, which is a fancy way of saying a whole bunch of stuff should respond to the same thing, but it doesn't. Right? We can't call there is not a common API on all of these objects. So one way to fix that would be to go into each of these objects and add a canAdmin method. But that's terrible. And the reason that's terrible is because code that changes together should be written together. If you're going to change the admin signature, you would have to go into 18 different files in order to change that. Code that changes together should be written together. You need to see that in the same file. And fortunately, Ruby has a nice little tool for us for that, and that's refinements. So we're going to refine the event class to add a consistent API. So we're going to refine event, def admin user host equals user. Now the logic that is encased in the event class is actually in the event class. Now it's there, but it's not in the declaration of the class in the event.rb file. It's not taking up room. It's not in the middle of a space where it doesn't matter, right? It's written in the space where it's going to change. It's co-located that way. And we can do the same thing for our other objects. We can refine photo. We can refine post. We can actually refine all of them such that that becomes that. There is no case statement. There is no conditional. Well, there are a lot of conditions. But there's no conditional over there. We moved it, which means it's better. Yeah. I mean, this is arguably better. We'll get into that. So at this point, we've seen a couple patterns, and we can start to extract some common behavior out of each of these different examples. So if we go back to our scope example, this is really common in my app. I don't know if it is in yours, but I'm going based on mine. I do this everywhere, and I did it so much I needed something to take out those 3 lines and make it 1, because I'm really tired of, I don't like lots of lines. And so this is so common that I made this. So this object, and then we call results, right? So let's just do 1 line of metaprogramming that is not even really that much metaprogramming. It's def query. So what we're going to do is we're going to define a query method. That query method defines a scope, just like we already were doing. It takes an arbitrary number of arguments. It initializes the object that we pass to it. It sends it on, and it calls results, just in the exact same way we were previously doing. And so all we have to do is extend, which we can put into application record or wherever, and then just transfer that, and that becomes that. It's very simple. And this just can go everywhere. And now you have a system, you have a structure in place. Multi-line scopes should always use queries in this app. It's not a general statement. That's just saying, in this app, this is what we want. We're going to put that structure in place. If we go back to this example, it's pretty similar. We want to extract an object. We want to call a method based on the same method that you already have. This is called delegation, so we're just going to do the exact same thing. So object, delegated method. So let's make a factory method. This is not the factory pattern. Don't say it is. It's just a method called factory, and all it does is it defines a method that is based on the first argument, which initializes an object based on the second argument, where the first argument is the object that you're currently inside of. And then if you delegate various things, you can just delegate various things. And what that looks like is this. We have an admin check object, and that admin check object is referenced by an admin check method. And then we're going to delegate canAdmin over to that. And what that allows us to do is to call user.canAdmin event, right? Where previously we had a giant case statement inside of the user class that had way too much information about all of the various APIs pertaining to various objects. And all of that information was encapsulated inside the user class where it was not changing. Now we have that segregated into a separate object where it is properly factored, and it took 5 lines of code to get this. And this is a pattern we can use everywhere. This is a pattern we can use all over our app. So we've gone from static analysis where we've defined the standards. Now we need to go and take those standards and enforce them. We need to go apply them to our application. So reflection tests, it's just a way of saying basically Rubocop or weak rules, but implemented on your own, implemented inside of your test suite. So the first question we're going to answer, and these are just examples from my application. These are not specific to anyone, these are not generic to any Rails app. These are just ways that I've found to be very useful. What needs to be changed before we upgrade the next version of Rails? If you've seen comments around your codebase, be like, be sure to test this when we upgrade Rails. Monkey patching Rails here, so we'll need to test this when we upgrade. We can remove this when we upgrade Rails. These are all dirty lies. You know why these are dirty lies? Because you will never do this. Some junior engineer is going to find this in 3 months and say, I don't think this is relevant anymore. Hey, Bobby, can we remove this? And you'll be like, yeah, I think. Hopefully it doesn't break anything. Let's deploy. And that's what's going to happen. These are dirty, dirty lies. Don't put these in your code base. You are a programmer. You can program your way out of this. Let's write an upgrade test. We're going to override the test method from ActiveSport test case. We're going to get the current version of Rails. We're going to flunk every single test if this object, or if this test case has not been tested with the current version of Rails. And we're going to add a whole bunch of test cases. This is actually directly copied from my app. I have 5 things that I'm doing terrible things with. I'm monkey patching Rails here. There was a bug in Rails 5.2 where counter caches and touches didn't work, so I had to work around that. I have a really horrible metal programming thing here, and I'm overriding as JSON on comment. I'm not proud of any of these things, but I know that when I upgrade Rails, that all 5 of these test cases are going to fail. I will not be able to push code until I have validated that all of these work in the next version of Rails. Also, ideally, I'll remove these at some point. Another question, when do we split actions out into a different controller? I am draconian in my approach to controller actions. You will not have more than the 5 that are allowed. I have an API, so 7 if you're using the full stack. So to-dos, split this out into a different controller. To-dos are terrible. To-dos are not a thing. All right, don't do to-dos. They're bad. To-do, refactor permissions for this controller. To-do, share this logic. None of these things are ever going to happen. Don't lie to yourself. You're lying. So here's a test. Let's load up every single controller, loop through the descendants, write a test for every single one, make sure that they don't have any others. This build will fail if you have any other controller actions. Now when someone asks you, When do we split this out? Just tell them to run the test suite. You don't have to talk to them. It's much easier this way. Furthermore, it avoids it. It's not just that it makes my introvert heart happy and avoids the discussion. That's not just it. It also makes it so that there's no argument. Because the argument about whether or not you should have controller action names that are different is dumb. That's not a valid argument. It's a stupid argument. And the reason that's a stupid argument is because it doesn't freaking matter. It matters 100% if you're consistent. It matters 0% if you have list as an action. Who cares? Doesn't matter. Matters if you're consistent, not if you're right. Finally, where do we place logic that belongs to active record models? To do, move this into its own object, refactor to use the new factory system from earlier, reuse logic from other location. Let's get a little bit hairy. So here's a test. Let's use Ripper. Ripper is from the Ruby standard library. It gives you an abstract syntax tree of the Ruby code. What that means is it tells you how the code is written. Let's parse every single file in our models directory and find every single instance method definition. It does not matter if you understand this code. What I'm telling you is it's going to find every single definition. And then it's going to fail the test suite if you write any methods on models. I'm draconian. So find all the defs, get the list, completely fail. I like this a lot. Most people don't. That's fine, but it's consistent in my app. That's the question. Is it consistent in yours? Doesn't matter if I'm right. It matters if I'm consistent. Other reflection tests you might consider. No multi-line scopes without using a query object. We talked about that earlier. No associations without automatic inverses or inverse of specified. This is actually a really good thing that you should do. No if statements. That's in my app, in my controllers. I love it. We can talk more about that later if you're interested. It's the best. This is not heresy. I feel like I have to defend myself at this point. You're all looking at me very, very confused. It's not heresy. And the reason it's not heresy is because when engineers come into my code base, there's one way to do everything. There are not multiple ways. And I know that's going against the beauty of Ruby. You can call length or count or size on many different things, and that's wonderful in a lot of circumstances. But if you're growing a code base, if you're growing very quickly with a lot of engineers, with a lot of people who have to come on board and understand what you're doing and the way that you do things, you need structure. You need bumpers in place so that you'll hit at least one pin. The corollary is that it is heretical to expect code quality to be maintained exclusively through code review. If you are a senior engineer and you have 5 new junior engineers and they come on board and they bring all of their past baggage, right? It's a new relationship, right? They're very excited. The first kiss just happened. It's so exciting. But the problem is that they brought all their baggage with them. They brought, this is the way that you do Ruby code. Funny story, there is no one way you do Ruby code. But they all think there is. And they're going to push code up in pull requests. And you're going to have to merge it. Because you have to keep pushing code because you're a business and you have to make money. But the problem is, now the onus is on the senior engineer. And now things grind to a halt. Because now the senior engineer has to spend so much time in code review that they can't push any features themselves. Whereas if they had spent the time to put the structures in place, then they would have been able to keep going. Finally, we have strategic investment, enforcing standards on old code. And this is where I have to give you guys the business. This is where I have to have some real talk. Passing a linter is not a measure of code quality at all. Most people think it is. It's not. Passing tests is not a measure of code quality. Using design patterns is not a measure of code quality. This one especially, everyone reads that Gang of 4 book and then they're like, we're going to use null object pattern. And I'm like, why? Why are you doing this? There has to be a reason. We have to go back to what we said at the beginning to understand why, or what is a good measure of code quality. Code is written by the first engineer that has to understand the problem, but it is read by every engineer. Readability is the measure of the quality of code that is going to change. If code is not going to change, then linters are not useful. Tests are not useful. You should not write tests if code is never going to change. Why would you bother? It's never going to change. You can manually test it, and it won't matter. there is no benefit to you to writing that test. Nerd points don't exist. Congratulations on using that hefty design pattern. I just shipped 3 features while you were busy, masturbating to your code. So let's go back to this and let's figure out how we can enforce on the code that is just changing. And unfortunately, it's only a 2-line change. We get this here legacy object. Read a legacy.txt. We say no more defs and models, and we subtract out the old legacy ones. Boom! Now all of your future code will have no more instance methods defined in models, but it will still have all the old ones. Your test suite passes, and you're good to go. What this means is that future development will be the structure that you want. Future development will be the way you want it to happen. But the legacy code can live on. It will be fine. And when you're in there next time, you can change it. And if not, then it never changed and there was no point in changing it in the first place. You wouldn't have wasted your time. So I don't need to convince you of this, but I'm going to anyway. When code is readable, there are many, many benefits. Features are shipped more quickly because there's only one way to do things. There's no discussion. You don't have to wait. You don't have to sit around and talk to a senior engineer and be like, hey, how do I do this? There is a documented way. It's right there in front of you. Every single place in the code base that does this same thing does it in this way. Engineers can onboard way more quickly. Bus factor is reduced. Bus factor being, if we go back to the very first example of my trip to Italy, it would not have mattered that only a manual car was available, because there would have only have been manual cars, and I would have been able to drive it. I still can't drive a manual car, by the way. I haven't actually solved this problem yet. Patterns become self-evident. You can start to extract more and more things, and writing tests is way easier. Things are more isolated. It's funny, you see these things of like, every single method gets pulled out into a separate object, and these objects are tiny, and everyone's like, what are we going to do with all these tiny and testable and well-factored objects? I'm just like, you will be fine. Dijkstra said, elegance is not a dispensable luxury, but a factor that decides between success and failure. Now, I hate pulling quotes, so I always pull one from them that's stupid, so I also pulled this one. Object-oriented program is an exceptionally bad idea, which only have originated in California. So I just love that. I think he may have been a huge dick. But he's a smart guy. Elegance is what we need. Elegance will get us further. Elegance and well-factored code is worth it. It is worth it to your business. It makes business sense to work on this. It will be faster. So we're going to modify this just a little bit right here at the end to really think about only working on the code that you need to and really thinking about strategic investment. We're going to determine the standards for future code, not for all the legacy stuff, just for future code. We're going to enforce standards on the new code as it changes. There's no need to advocate for going and forcing everything all the way through. You don't need that, especially if you decide that the standard changes. Then all of a sudden you've wasted a ton of time. And finally, we're going to enforce standards on old code if it needs to change. Thank you very much. All the code that I use is up on my GitHub. It's got some other various things that I didn't have time to get into. Yeah, any questions? Yeah.
How do you conduct code review?
Huh?
How do you conduct code review?
I mean, for functionality. And then if we have to have a discussion about the way that things are done, then we'll have a separate discussion. But yeah, hopefully quickly. I hate code review. Anybody else? Yeah?
Sorry, another quick.
No, sure.
I'm not familiar with Ripper.
Sure.
Is it clever enough when it traces the AST to determine if, for example, instance methods have been added to a model through metaprogramming?
No, it is not smart enough to do that. So it conducts lexical analysis, not necessarily semantic analysis. So if you were going to do that, you would need to do more of like a metaprogramming test where you go through and loop through the instance methods, which is 100% possible. This was just kind of a quick and dirty way to find all of these. That thing would also 100% fail if you had a nested class. It would just, so, you'd have to modify that pretty heavily. Any others? Yeah.
You said there's 3 of you.
Huh?
You said there's 3 of you.
There are.
You're going through a lot of stuff to set this up for future you?
I'm going through a lot of this because I forget what I care about. I go through, no, seriously, I go through this because when I'm tired and it's 4 p.m. and it's a Friday, like I'm not gonna care where I put things, and I don't want to think about it. There's actually this really interesting story about when President Obama first got into office. I just clicked a thing. When President Obama first got into office, he got rid of all of his shirts that weren't charcoal or navy. Maybe it was white. I don't know. He got rid of most of his shirts so that he wouldn't have to make the decision of what shirt to wear, to only focus on the right things, right? So like I think there's value in this approach even with such a small development team, because I don't want to think about it. You know, I just don't want to make those decisions day to day. I want to make the decisions that matter to the actual functionality of the code. Anybody else? Yeah.
Or if you were doing this in like an old track code base,
Yeah.
would you suggest that when you're working on the feature, you sort of like you focus on fixing that area, like the hotspots, or how would you?
Maybe.
How would you attack it?
Yeah, if it's changing a lot. If you can see from a business perspective that part of the product is going to change a lot, then yes, absolutely. Go in and go ahead, be proactive about it. But if it's an analytics feature and your business has decided that you're going to focus more on the product and not the analytics, then no point in doing it. Just get in and get out, Walmart style. Anybody else? All right, thank you.
Let's take a quick break. We'll regroup at 7 o'clock. All right, and then we'll have some announcements and another talk.
Okay.
I'm sitting on the picnic benches and
Everybody, get started. I know you're gonna hear. Oh no, that's fine. We've got a few announcements to make. First of all, again, thanks for coming. Appreciate it. And August 2nd, Tuesday of the night is tonight. That's the presentation night. Thank you for coming. The first Tuesday of the Tuesday of the night, Tuesday of the month. The first Tuesday of the month is Project Night. That happens over at Thoughtbot on Winter Street. It's pretty low-key night, very chill. People love it. Our next Project Night is Election Day. And we would like to press upon everybody that they should go vote. And that's as far as I go. So please vote. We're going to see if we can maybe tie in some sort of activity for Project Night, maybe with Code for Boston. We don't know yet. We're not sure. We'll see what happens. If not, Project is still on anyway, so come on by. But please go Boston. We're going to say you can't come in unless you have a little I voted sticker, but we won't do that. We have a Slack channel if you're not on it. If you go to slack.bostonrb.org, you can join our Slack channel. We are also on Twitter at BostonRB. And we are always looking for talks for the meetings. If you have a talk that you want to give, if you just want to discuss it, you got some ideas you want to bounce off of, you can contact any of the organizers. You can also submit your talks through papercall.io/BostonRB. That link is also in the meetup notes and on the Slack channel if you want to get it from there. I'd like to thank EasyCater for this wonderful space and the wonderful food. Nicole, would you like to come up and say a few words?
Sure. I think it's from here, but I'm Nicole. I'm our tech recruiter here. So thank you all for coming. We love hosting it, and obviously get some food if you haven't already. But I mean, I don't know if you just saw that our jobs list that was posted up there. We are looking for a lot of people right now. So full stack, front end, back end. We have a couple of tech leads open and site reliability engineer. So if you're interested or just interested in learning more about us, come introduce yourself. I'll be over here or around. But thanks again for coming.
Thanks for having us. We really appreciate it. Show of hands, who is looking for a job right now? 1, 2, 3. Okay, we got time. If you'd like to stand up and introduce yourself and tell us what you're looking for, Vince?
Sure, yeah. Hey, I'm Vince, and I can just say that the 4 of us are all in an immersive, focusing on web development at General Assembly. So we're 5 weeks into a 12-week program where we just like 40 hours a week get instruction on front and back end web development. Anyway, the point of that for most of us is to be gainfully employed doing something that we love. We're all pretty passionate about it right now, so that's our group introduction, I guess.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, sure. Hey, I'm Brendan. I'm a contractor. I work in React and Ruby. I have roughly 10 years experience, and I'm looking for contracts starting in January, so just throwing my name out there.
Right, excellent. Patrick. Yep, okay, all right. Anybody else? I don't know.
Hi, my name's Taylor. I was a release engineer for a little bit over a year. Before that, I was an English teacher. And then I ended up becoming a software developer about a year ago. And then I ended up getting let go due to company downsizing. So trying to get back in on that horse. So looking for any entry-level development positions.
Excellent. Robert.
I'm kind of in this, Robert, kind of in the same boat. I graduated from boot camp in 2015, been working on my own stuff since. And yeah, looking for junior roles, apprenticeships, co-ops, interns, those sort of things.
Okay. And now, show of hands, who is hiring? Wow, okay. Fight. We're going to be going to talk after the meeting, but we're going to be heading to Elephant and Castle after the meeting. If you would all like to come, if you come, then I think the job people will too. But get to know each other, and maybe everybody can walk away happy. Okay. I think that's it. Do we have any community announcements? Anything going on?
Register to vote, everybody.
Okay, all right, no community announcements this time. Okay, everybody else coming in?
There's one in mid-November, probably. Just wait for it.
Okay.
It's fine.
Touch the skies.
Okay. There'll be news about that. All right, that's all I've got for now. I turn it over to Michael Durant, and then we have an announcement after he speaks. So, thanks very much, Michael.
Thank you very much, Sean. And just following on with that, what are the companies that are hiring? Can you tell us some of the company names?
Ruby.
No, your company's called Ruby?
Privy.
Privy. Oh, I'm sorry, my mistake. Thoughtbot.
Simply Business.
Level Up.
Radio.
Cool. All right, those are the names to watch for. Cool. So I'm going to be talking about Ruby Power Tools. First of all, I want to give thanks to Tim, Melissa, and Sean, and any other organisers that are here today for setting this up. It takes a bit more than it seems. And also thanks to Easy Cater again. Business catering made easy. And there's their jobs. And thanks to everyone for coming. It always takes a bit of effort to come to a meetup, but it takes everyone to make that little bit of effort, so it takes the community, so it's greatly appreciated. As Sean said, we do need speakers. That's the site for it there. And I've already posted all of the slides, links, and code samples that you'll see today on my GitHub account, and I believe that I have posted that link on our site as well. We'll try to do that before I present, make it easy so I won't forget. All right, Ruby Power Tools. My name is Michael Durant with 2 R's, fairly easy to find in most of the places that you would look.